Hello, YouTube. So this is obviously a bit of a change of scenery. I'm finally done with school, graduated, all that good stuff. Unfortunately, right now, well, not like, it's a complicated situation. So I'm at my parents' place, and this is the quietest part of the house, our unfinished attic. And I figured that being able to hear me would be slightly more important than having a super pretty backdrop. So, excuse the unfinished attic shenanigans back behind me. So I wanted to get back on the YouTube Pagan Challenge wagon here. I've been gone for probably over a month. I don't remember when exactly I made that last video, but finals season kicked my ass, but I survived it. I finished my big capstone paper. My professor wants me to publish it, so I'm in the process of figuring out how to do that and looking for a job now that I am thrust out into the adult world. So all good things. But speaking of graduation and life rituals and all of that good stuff, that is the general theme of the YouTube Pagan Challenge topics that I wanted to talk about. So prompts 17 through 22 of the YouTube Pagan Challenge all center around different rites of passage, major life events, rituals, and that sort of a thing as they pertain to you being a pagan. I don't have a whole lot of experience with any of those to, give each single one its own in-depth, kind of video. So I thought I'd just throw them all into one. And so this is going to be kind of like my first YouTube Pagan Challenge video where it's all a little bit rambly and multiple topics kind of thrown together in one big video here. But cool stuff. So the questions are, how would you introduce spirituality to children? Would you pass your current Book of Shadows on to your children? 18 is funeral rites, and how would you prefer your remains be treated? 19, rites for the birth of a child, adoption, naming and blessing ceremonies, coming of age rites, and customs for the stages of life is number 20. 21 is marriage or partnership ceremonies. And 22 is there such a thing as a twin flame or a soulmate or a destined partner? And I'm going to talk about all of these things as they pertain to me and just my little thoughts on how I'm going to do things later in life, that sort of deal. Obviously, I'm only 22, so I haven't had so much life experience that I have a bunch of stories to relate on these topics. But I wanted to cover them, and I wanted to, get back on this YouTube Pagan Challenge thing, so let's go. So as I've mentioned probably in several videos, I really wasn't raised with a formal religious background. To my knowledge, I wasn't baptized in any sort of way. I don't think my parents had a naming or blessing ceremony. Not that I'm aware of. I don't think my sister was either. It's just not something my family did. So there's that. Major birthdays for me really were obviously 13, becoming a teenager. 16 wasn't that big of a deal for me because I didn't get my driver's training and whatnot done anywhere near that age. So it really wasn't that big of a deal. 18, when I first became an adult, that was kind of, cool and exciting. That was also, right after my high school graduation because of where my birthday fell in the year. And then the only other big birthday and coming of age thing that was really important to me recently was when I left my teens behind at age 20. That was kind of a special thing to me. By the time I hit 21, a couple years ago, basically one surprise, I had had alcohol before in my life, so it wasn't like it was my first drink. And I'd been able to drink legally when I visited the UK, so the magical 21st birthday really wasn't that magical. So that's just kind of a little bit about, birthdays that have been important to me. Obviously, everyone is kind of important because you reflect back on how far you've come and think about those sorts of things, all that sort of deal. I also obviously have not been married. I'm not part of a religious organization, so I've not had any sort of coming of age ritual or anything to that sense. So this is kind of like, here's my life story. I don't have any big coming of age rituals. I haven't been to any pagan hand fastings or rituals of that nature. So these are just kind of my thoughts of what I might do in the future. So I think that given the opportunity and provided I even end up having kids, that's something that is so far out of my scope as to what I want to do right now that I'm not even worried about it. But I think that I would definitely share my spirituality with them. I probably would do some sort of like simple, not like a big baptism thing, but like a small rite to, call upon my gods and my partner's gods, whoever they might worship, whatever, and kind of like bless and protect the child. When they're older, I'd want to share with them, the stories of the deities that I worship and celebrate my holidays that I find significant and, let them take part in some of that spellcraft ritual, etc. If they were interested as they got older. I'm not going to be one of those people that's like, you have to practice as I do. Like, I think that the key thing as far as sharing religion and spirituality with a kid, and this is coming from me who was recently a kid, I guess, is making it not something that's obligatory or something that will kind of, result in punishment if it's not followed perfectly. I think that it needs to be something exploratory, something that they're free to kind of look at and form their own conclusions on and work with as they see fit, rather than going, you have to do things this, and this way, or else the wrath of the gods upon you, that sort of a thing. I think that it's really something that you need to share what you do and what you believe, because otherwise you end up with some really weird conversations. But let them explore, let them find for themselves what they believe. And that's kind of how I plan to parent, if I parent at all. I don't know yet. Like I said, not something I'm worried about. But that is that. Any sort of like coming of age rites go for my kids. Probably like, becoming a teenager would be a big thing. Whenever they learn how to drive, that would be a big thing. Becoming an adult again, those sorts of deals. I think that's completely dependent upon the individual circumstances of their life, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, the whole point is that like open communication with your child and with, your spouse or, whatever, is the important thing as far as like deciding whether or not to celebrate those specific, coming of age moments in your kid's life. I think that's just more or less an individual thing. I don't think that I'd pass any of my books of shadows down, actually. Those are all deeply personal things to me. And I think eventually I want to create kind of like a compiled grimoire of all of my, created rituals, spells that I've written, poetry I've written, things that I've found useful, my own personal gnosis, those sorts of things. I do want to create a compendium of sorts of that, but I don't think that I'd pass my, journals themselves on. I think, well, I have plans for those, and I will talk about that when I get down to like the whole funerary rite thing. But definitely don't think I would pass those down. That is just something that is too personal to me, and who I let read them is very select right now, and I think that I would much rather have them, not passed down. But I'll get to that in a moment. Moving past childhood and adolescence and all of those coming of age rites, we have questions in the, prompt list there about marriage and partnership. I'm not really sure, honestly, if I believe in twin flames or soulmates and all that. I believe that my current boyfriend is someone that I would like to spend the rest of my life with. We've talked about marriage. We've talked about moving in together. We've talked about, all of these sorts of things, but I don't know. I find it really just far fetched sometimes that like there is that one person and you are soul destined to be with them and that is it. I think that whole idea, as far as, finding the one, and if you aren't finding the one, what are you doing in this relationship and that sort of a thing, I think that it kind of hinders the way that we sometimes try to like date and whatnot. I think that there's this assumption that like you have to find the one like as soon as possible, and I don't think that's the case. I think that sometimes you end up in multiple relationships before you find someone that you're finally going to like marry and live with for possibly the rest of your life. I think that it's all dependent. Our universe is chaos. Everything is subjective. I don't think that anyone is predestined to meet that one person. That said, I am very attached and very much in love with my boyfriend. And so if you're watching this, Lance, that is not at all to say anything bad about our relationship. Moving on to those like hand fastings or partnership ceremonies, that sort of a thing. I am guilty of having a Pinterest board of all of that kind of nonsense. I'm not into the whole big wedding, big thing, big ordeal thing. When we've talked about it, we've talked about, small wedding that's not that huge of a deal, and having, taking out more money for doing like something really cool on our honeymoon, like traveling abroad somewhere or having a really cool trip. Like the important thing is not so much the big party and making it like, oh, this is the most important day ever. I mean, for some people it is, but I think for us, that as far as we've talked anyway, it's much more to do with celebrating like your love for each other and those families coming together and that kind of a deal. And it's not about how much money you spend. For me anyway, like it's much more of a celebratory thing and who's involved and that kind of deal. As I've said though, I have many more things that I'm worried about right now, like paying back student loans and finding a job and moving out of my parents' place. So wedding stuff is all still a Pinterest board fantasy off in the periphery here. So it'll happen someday. I'm sure I'll have much more opinions on it when it is, imminently approaching, but not something that I'm terribly worried about at the moment. And some of the things, moving on to like the end of life stuff, that I'm more passionate about are like death and funeral rites. I've had this weird thing where the last like several fall winters in a row, my family or like close friends to my family have lost someone pretty much every winter, like consecutively. And I've been taking a lot of classes in anthropology and English and history about death and how we as people, and societies deal with death and caring for the dead and that sort of a thing. So death rites are something that I'm really interested in. I'm really looking more into the death positivity movements and the green burial movements because, I'm a pagan and I believe that we should return to the earth and make end of life rituals as, eco-friendly as possible and really involve because that's what funerals are for. They're not really for the dead. They're kind of more for the family of the dead and helping them kind of cope with that loss and transition on to life without that individual. So I think that they should be more involved. I think that I would love to really get more involved in the funeral industry. That's my eventual goal. And help with getting families involved again in arranging those things, in caring for the corpse, etc. My progress on that is a little bit halted because I am still in Michigan and not going to Florida, where the program I was looking to get into is. But that is still something that I've been studying and researching and really kind of, interested in that sense. As far as how I want myself and my remains treated, I think honestly that I would rather have myself cremated, like the bios urns, I think they're called, where they, cremate you and then your remains are used to fertilize like a tree. I think that is probably the go-to method for me. I'm not about the whole concrete, tomb in the ground and the big stone slab and whatnot. It's not me. Don't bother with all of the crazy chemicals and the wood and stuff that you're putting in the earth. Just let me return. I'm gonna sneeze. It's dusty up here. Or maybe not. I also, as I've mentioned briefly earlier, I really want my books of shadows, my personal journals, to be burned with me. I don't want those lingering around. As I said, I'm going to create something at some point that is kind of, a compiled process of what it is my practice was about and what it is I believed, what sort of things I did spell-wise and that kind of deal. But I don't really want the journal entries themselves to go anywhere other than to be buried or cremated with my remains. That's kind of my thoughts on all of those different rituals and prompts, I guess. As I said, I've not really experienced that much of life to have a lot of stories or opinions on those. A lot of this is just things that are, in the process of being thought about as, I get older. So that is my spiel on that. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and thank you for listening to me blather on for however long this video is. I think it's 20 minutes, whatever. Anyway, I think that the big thing to take away from it is that my faith in the gods and my spirituality are going to play a big part in those rites, no matter how they end up coming to be formatted and carried out. And it all depends on what happens in the future. So share your own thoughts on those in the comment section below. I'll link you to my blog post on this topic. And have a great day, guys. Blessed be.